These are by far the easiest conditions I've ever seen to be able to make obscene amounts of wealth trading the public markets. I personally know people who have turned less than 100 grand into tens of millions of dollars trading these markets. Someone in my Discord recently turned a $50,000 investment into over $3 million in 2 months, just following my calls on semiconductor and AI stocks. This is a bit of an update from last month in my previous video where I discussed him turning 50K into 1 million, which he's since turned into over 3. And in this video, I'm going to be discussing the exact framework that I've been using. And I've sort of given the blueprints in past videos. I discussed my trading system right here, which I've also discussed in many other previous videos over the past year, as well as discussing in my video previous to that how to basically invest in all of the public market plays as well as the private market investments involved in this sort of AI and robotics play that's been going insane over the past few months. I mean, you guys have been seeing Anthropic valuations going from 300 billion to over 1.2 trillion dollars in the secondaries. And in this video, I gave actionable setups for all of the hottest stocks that have been trending way higher since then, like Bloom Energy, Intel, SanDisk, AMD, ARM, Micron. As you guys can check the charts, I mean, ever since then, they've ballooned, right? Every single day afterwards, it's just been up only. I mean, AMD since the all-time high break, up 70%. Dell up, 65%. It's funny because people were telling me that buying all-time highs was a stupid idea, and here we are. All of these stocks are at new all-time highs yet again, making more all-time highs after their previous all-time high, which was, at least 50% lower. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the exact framework, getting down to the nitty-gritty execution details. Because I've seen, a lot on Twitter, people will try to find thought leaders. They'll try to find KOLs, various traders to worship, to look up to. They try to follow Leopold's trades. They try to find their next hero, like, a Kevin Shu, stuff like that. Ultimately, all of these people, they're not your heroes, right? Following someone's calls is never going to lead to a long-term productive system, right? You need an actual system, an objective framework, right? Most of these people just have seasons and they maybe follow their intuitions. They're not going to describe you exactly how they do it, down to the criteria of their system and the execution, how they execute exactly. But I've done this in all my videos. I've described all of the core aspects of my trading system unambiguously. And the system I use that I've curated over the past few years, I believe is the easiest, most simple system that you could ever come up with. But I believe it's also the most effective. And the reason for this is because it employs very simple understandings of human psychology. And it is the most objective framework that uses the least amount of assumptions. There's no indicators. I mean, you don't have to take a whole course to understand it. I can explain it very simply to anybody in less than a few minutes. And builds it around 5 objective criteria, right? These are criteria that cannot be disputed. And something like market structure is an objective framework that allows us to say, okay, like this chart is trending up, right? Because it's making higher lows and higher highs this entire time. And an all-time high breakout is an objective framework where we see, okay, this has been a range high for multiple years, and this is an all-time high. This objectively means that if we have momentum into this level, we have good market structure into this level and after, then we can actually assemble some sort of trade setup that is asymmetric in nature, right? The underlying assumption being that, one, people understand what market structure is and they will buy things with trending market structure. And two, right, that if we see a breakout above some sort of range high or some sort of high time frame support or resistance level, this means that there's going to be some fall through. It means that buyers or sellers in some cases are going to be chasing that price action. And I recently talked to someone about my system, and I kind of found out more implicitly about why this works. Because I've been using this for a while. I've been sort of honing the elements of my system for a long time. And I recently talked to an investor friend of mine. Shout out to Jianshu Dong, who put me onto Bloom Energy very early. And he sort of talked me through why my system works. And he mentioned something very important, which is that implicitly I'm betting on a transition from fundamental investors to growth investors. And this is something that's very important because really I don't have to be that smart. Like this assumption underlying it means that I never claim to be some sort of genius that can predict the price action of the charts, right? Inherently in my system is this assumption that it's always better to try to react than to predict. And this is the most important part of my system where I don't know if, back then, like, in February, Dell looked pretty bad, right? I wasn't trying to buy some sort of bottom, right? The only thing I know is that if we do actually break out, then maybe I can entertain along. But I'm not going to try to buy it somewhere down here where there's no clear answer at where the chart's going to go, right? It's just ranging, right? And this is how I get so quote unquote lucky all the time, in the sense that it's common that whenever I buy something, good news imminently comes out about it, right? For example, with Dell, it looked good after the all-time high break, and then suddenly Trump has mentioned that everyone should go buy a Dell, right? And the converse happens too. Whenever I short something, a lot of times bad news comes out, right? For example, Bitcoin looked pretty heavy for a while. It swept all-time highs twice. And then that day on October 10th, when everything went to shit, right, that morning, Trump mentioned that he was going to take action against China, and then boom, right, we had a bad event. But the charts already spoke this into action, right? So the fundamental underlying assumption in all this is that narratives will follow the price. Ultimately, price is the only objective indicator, which is why I don't use any indicators at all. I don't use RSIs. There's no moving averages. There's nothing. I only use high time frame SR levels and market structure. This is the most simplistic system you could possibly use. I can tell within like 5 seconds if some chart's something that I will like to buy, right? For example, most crypto alts, I'm just going to scroll to some random one. I don't know, something like sushi, right? Terrible chart. I can tell within 5 seconds. This is like a 5-second rule. I can tell immediately, this is not a chart that I want to buy. This looks awful. But something like, I don't know, like Bloom Energy, right? Holy shit, right? This market structure is up only, continuously making higher highs, higher lows. This is something that I am interested in buying, although we just had a sweep right here, right? So don't want to necessarily buy an all-time high sweep, but in a higher time frame context, this is a chart that I'm at least interested in, right? And because of this, because of the narrative involved in this chart, because of the price action, the market structure, we can then start to get a little more granular, right? For example, a chart that I've been buying a lot recently is a chart on Datadog, right? This is something that I've been publishing a lot of research on in my Discord. Same with RKLB, with the whole space talk narrative. But these charts are ones that I want to buy because, right, we see that this is an all-time high breakout over, a 4-5 year level right here since 2022. And Datadog has strong earnings into this level, right? And then we start to grind higher with market structure that is conducive to bullish market structure, right? Bullish price action. So because we have this grinding structure above, then we'd say, hey, like we could actually buy, I started buying around right here, and with invalidation at some higher low, maybe somewhere down here. So this is a very asymmetric setup because if it goes, right? If it doesn't, that's totally fine, right? Then we lose small, but then we want to always win big by comparison. Same with CrowdStrike, right? This is something I bought last week as well, right? After I bought RKLB, this is probably a better example actually on RKLB, where I ended up buying this all-time high breakout above $100, right? This was something that was very clean, sort of a round number thing, as well as a previous all-time high, into the SpaceX IPO, right? Strong narrative around space stocks. Very easy to buy with invalidation below the New York Open low. And again, implicit in my system is an assumption that there are certain periods of time where volatility is going to happen. And in this case, it's around New York Open, right? And around New York Open, right, on this particular day, we made a move, right? So on Friday, May 8th, just after my previous video, we made this big move up right here. And this is something I was looking for, right? I mentioned this in my previous market update, where usually, like, every single week, I describe my preview on different stocks or different plays that I'm looking at. And I mentioned how I was looking at the RKLB sort of space stock narrative, and that the all-time high breakout was pretty imminent, right? This was the chart back then. And then I ended up buying this right afterwards, pulling the trigger right after the New York Open pump because this was just looking very good. And of course, right, we just got continuous legs up, series of higher highs and higher lows the entire way up. And so this is something that's been very, very clean and is gapping up yet again in the pre-markets as I record this video. So, stocks like this are always ones where you want to buy these very asymmetric trades where you have the setup that presents you a very good risk reward opportunity where your risk is very little, right? If it fails, that means you cut the trade somewhere here, but if it succeeds, then it goes all the way up, right? You make 30-40%, you lose, less than 5%. So you make 6 to 7 times more than you would lose. Very asymmetric, right? And so these were the plays that I described in my previous video, where I discussed the exact picks that I was looking at in the AI sector. And in particular, right, I actually discussed in quite a lot of detail ARM, right? And I discussed, I mean, this was even discussed in my previous video on the all-time high breakout of 183. And this is something that I ended up buying and it went crazy. And I mentioned how it was sort of creeping up into that same level, right? At 237. So if we got a breakout above that level, that'll be worth pursuing. And that ended up happening, right? Where we sort of rejected from that level after earnings, but then we came back above right here. And this was something that I was looking for a long time. And this is just yet another breakout right here where we are, about 30-40% above there. And similar to Dell, right? I mentioned specifically Dell as an example of something that I wanted to buy the all-time high breakout of in my previous video. And ever since then, we are up yet another, we are at 307 in the pre-market right now. So again, right, we look at this all-time high, we're up a good, 45-50% from those levels. So again, for all these kinds of trades, I'm looking for asymmetry, right? I'm looking for the idea of, is this a narrative also that aligns with something that the market cares about? Is it liquid, right? And for a while, it wasn't until Trump started mentioning this when in talks with, Intel and stuff like that, right? And this was something that Trump mentioned. Everyone should buy a Dell computer or something like that in a speech. And then it's just gone crazy, right? So there's an alignment of market structure, narrative, momentum, liquidity, all of these different factors that all align. And especially with this breakout, right? This breakout above this key SR, yet again during New York Open, and then boom, right? We got this huge candle right out of New York Open. So it's always important to be around during these periods of volatility. But yeah, that's kind of how it goes. And like, obviously, not every single trade has continuation, but for the most part, these are very, very good conditions, right? And that's kind of how you have to be able to wait for these conditions to present themselves. You can't just expect that every single day you're going to get all-time highs on stocks or crypto for that matter, right? For example, for many months, I didn't really trade at all. I didn't make a single trade from like maybe January to most of February and March because the markets were just so dry. Nothing was happening, right? At the beginning of the month, for example, most of these stocks were sitting around here, right? But now they're going crazy, and it's because I was paying attention every single day, trying to understand where the market was trending, what were important levels of interest, and then monitoring the market structure into those levels. So that's how you kind of want to play these markets, is looking for those all-time high breakouts. For example, AMD is a good example of something else that's making new all-time high. I discussed this right around here, actually, which is where I started scaling in just after the all-time high break, and has obviously gone up a lot. And it's making yet another all-time high right here. Could be something of interest as well as a sort of newer play. But yeah, that's kind of what I have to say about most of these AI stocks. I mean, you pretty much just have to continue buying all-time high breakouts. Anyone telling you otherwise is crazy because these are by far the best setups in the markets. This is the dirtiest, secret that nobody wants you to know about, pretty much, is that it seems retarded to buy all-time highs, but it's just a fact. Like, you just have to do it. Like, all of these have been the absolute best setups. And if you lose, you hardly lose anything because if there's no continuation, that's fine, right? We just cut the trade, move on to the next one. Set your invalidation below some New York Open low or some intraday low, and then we move on, right? And this has been the case for a lot of these stocks where they've just continued ripping. They haven't had any invalidation, right? For example, with RKLB, when I entered that trade, this was the low after New York Open, and it's never gone below there since then. It's just been up only. So something to think about for most of these AI stocks. I'm continuing to stay in a lot of my plays in them have been in SanDisk, Micron, with RKLB, Intel, Bloom Energy, Datadog, CrowdStrike, ARM, AMD, Dell. I'm in all of these plays. I'm definitely expecting a decent amount higher in the coming days. I'm looking for the setups that I just described, looking for those all-time high breakouts, clean structure above those all-time highs, and ready to trade them as always. But just wanted to, touch upon crypto real quick. I know that this is something that I've been describing as not really worth your time, and it still really hasn't. I mean, Bitcoin still looks pretty fucking terrible. There have been some plays that I entered. For example, I did actually enter a structural sort of breakout on Hyperliquid. This is something that I looked at last week, right? I was mentioning in a lot of previous videos that I'm looking mostly at Hyperliquid above $50, right? And this is something I did end up entering a few days ago as it sort of broke out above 50. And the main reason why is because even though this is not an all-time high breakout, it is a break of structure, right? So whenever I try to look at different trades I want to take, I want to look at really obvious ones, right? And this is very obvious, right? The chart's going up. And so the previous lower high right here is something to watch out for because, like I said before, market structures like this, where this is a downtrend, this is an uptrend, right? And if you see a break out of a downtrend, let's say we have this structure, but then we sort of see this right here, then we have a higher high and a higher low. And that's something you want to identify for most of the charts. And this is, in this case, a higher high. And then we're also starting to break out above a sort of psychological level around $50. So started scaling to that trade, and especially since we had some very clean market structure above this level, was pretty much this TWAP structure formation, very, very clean grind up. So very willing to take these trades as always, but these are lower size, right? Ultimately, I mentioned in the initial trade that like sizing is not big. It's just a fraction of what I put into these AI stocks, mostly because it's crypto, but also because, right, at the end of the day, it's not an all-time high break. It's not a clean one. And the price action above this all-time high has not been clean either. So I'm not really looking to trade this that much unless we start to get something really clean above this level. But usually I look for something cleaner, and also it's like very sectors like dependent, right? In AI stocks where this is, all of the world's money and attention is on these stocks, then of course I'm going to size into them more. There's something like crypto where pretty much no one cares about it, except for a few different coins. So that's really the mindset that I have. And when you see people win, right, they post some sort of setup online, you have to be careful to understand, okay, like, how are they determining their sizing? What is their system? If they have no system that can name, they're definitely grifting, and they're not going to tell you because they don't have a system. They're just trying to pump some low cap stock so that they can farm you, right? Don't get farmed. And really in crypto, I'm looking at a few different coins. There's really only a few that are worth, noting. And really the strongest one recently has been Near. And yes, like this isn't really totally aligned to my system because the high time frame chart is shit, right? The main thing with this is that it's been so strong on lower time frames, and we had this sort of big breakout above this sort of key SR at like 1.9. This is where the previous lower high was, and so now we're making a higher high above here, and that was kind of where I decided my entry, shortly above this sort of breakout right here. And yeah, ever since then, it's just been going up like crazy. So in summary, really what my system looks like is 95% of it is just sitting on my hands. I look at charts, identify levels of interest, and then I discuss them in my server. And then if the trigger actually happens where there's a clean setup on it, right? Let's say there's a level of interest, and then there's a market structure that's, very grindy, it's going up in a straight line. It's pretty much just a clean setup. Then I would just left curve. I would just retard max. I would just join the trade without question, define invalidations, and I'll just punt it. And really, I'll just trust my system and then TP as it goes. And I will have, asymmetric targets. And if those get met, then I'll take profits. And then that's it. And then simply I will move those profits from public markets into private markets, into deals, for example, like Prometheus that I discussed before, where I looked for essentially asymmetric opportunities in private markets as well. I was able to invest in companies like Anthropic, SpaceX, OpenAI, those kinds of companies years ago before they started getting really hot. And I continue to look for these opportunities every single day, where I spend a majority of my time talking to family offices, funds, stuff like that. And then I'll look for opportunities with large TAMs, like total addressable markets, and then I will take investments in those. So feel free to reach out to me if you have any sort of companies of interest or any deal flow that you'd like to share. We'd be happy to reciprocate that in return. But yeah, that's pretty much how I manage both public and private market trades in general. Hopefully this video has helped you sort of refine your system and giving you some actionables and some very clear understandings of how I execute on these trades. But yeah, if you guys found this video helpful, would appreciate you guys sharing this as always, and I'll see you guys next time.